Welcome. I'll speak on the mystery schools and the esoteric wisdom, and I'm Sue Prescott. To discuss the mystery schools effectively, I need to start with where, when, and why they began. I'm basing most of my information on the writings of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, but also from others, including other books by HPB, The Secret Doctrine and Fundamentals of Esoteric Philosophy, but The Mystery Schools, this wonderful book by Grace Noki. And she takes a lot of quotes from Blavatsky in it. The Masters in the Path by Charles Leadbeater. Initiation, The Perfecting of Man by Annie Besant. The Mysteries by Annie Besant, that was an article written in 1917. The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries by Manly P. Hall. Then there is The Winter Solstice Part 3, a little higher on the list, by Boris de Zirkov, and he was a distant cousin to HPB, and that was an article written many years ago. As many of you know, the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, along with Henry Steele Olcott and others. And her major work is The Secret Doctrine, in which she goes into anthropogenesis of a human being, and that's the origin and evolution of a human being, along with cosmogenesis, and that's the origin and evolution of the universe. The Secret Doctrine teaches us about the beginning of manifestation after pralaya, the time when there's no manifestation. To introduce when the mystery schools began, I need to give a brief summary about the beginning of manifestation of our planet and briefly describe how humanity came into being. Science speaks about the formation of a planet or a solar system, which may have had its beginnings from the intense magnetism of a black hole. So you can see the picture from NASA of Sagittarius A, a black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. Manifestation in our world is poetically described in the Secret Doctrine in the stanzas of Dijon, which come from the Book of Dijon, which is an ancient Tibetan manuscript about the origin of the universe. And Blavatsky based the Secret Doctrine on this and gave explanations about its meaning. In the stanzas of Dijon, Dijon comes from dhyana, meaning meditation or contemplation, and jnana, so I'm saying that phonetically, but that might be said jhana or jnana. That means intuitive wisdom. Just before the birth of our planet and the solar system, when there was no manifestation, the stanzas of Dijon reads, the eternal parent, or space, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. Universal mind was not, for there were no celestial beings to manifest it. So you can hear the poetry in the stanzas, and I'm wanting to point out that this is the first reference to the celestial beings who help with the formation of our planet and with humankind. The stanzas of Dijon refer to this nothingness as the darkness that breathes over the slumbering waters of life. To show a correspondence with Christianity and Judaism, in Genesis, in the Holy Bible, and this is the Bible of both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, and of course the Christian Bible has the New Testament added, which is the story of Jesus. But it reads, Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The stanzas of Dijon goes on to describe the start of manifestation with darkness radiates light, and light drops one solitary ray into the waters, into the mother deep. And then in Genesis, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then in the secret doctrine in the stanzas, darkness vanished and was no more. It disappeared in its own essence, the body of fire and water, of father and mother. So to give a little background about the power that causes manifestation, it's called Fohat, which is quite interesting as the stanzas describe it. It's the force behind it all. Fohat is the living force created by will. On the earthly plane, its influence is felt in the magnetic and active forces. On the cosmic plane, it is present in the constructive power that carries out the formation of all things. On our physical plane, Fohat is the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. Fohat is the link between spirit and matter. Lastly, Fohat, among other energies, is electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, and cohesion. So this fills out a little bit more of our understanding of Fohat, which is the energy behind our will, which is what we use to progress either in a mystery school or on our own spiritual path. As we continue with manifestation, it proceeds with gases forming from the simplest of molecules. So this picture shows two nebulae, which are basically clouds of dust, hydrogen, helium, and other ionized gases. As our Earth progresses to become a planet, Blavatsky teaches us that it is at first a spiritual sphere, then a consolidated mass of gaseous matter. The stanzas describe how Fohat works. He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them, round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion, some one way, some the other way. So this last part refers to Venus and Uranus, which turn on their axes in a different direction than the other planets, a clockwise or retrograde rotation, and the rest turn counterclockwise. Over the millennia, now that's thousands and millions of years at times, our planet becomes more and more defined, and human beings are created who also at first are only spiritual. Blavatsky describes this process from the stanzas of Dijon. Human beings evolve through a series of developmental stages called root races or waves of humanity. Now, these are not races as we know them on the physical plane. This isn't at all physical, it's highly spiritual. Blavatsky uses the term to describe a long period of evolution. The first developmental stage or root race was produced by the high angelic beings called Dhyani Chohans. Now, there's no picture of these because they are arupa, meaning no form, but Jeffrey Hodson's The Kingdom of the Gods gives us pictures of the denser members of the angelic hierarchy, and they're called Rupa Devas. They are angels with form or with rupa. On the left is a picture of the mountain deva, and the other picture depicts a healing deva or an angel, the lord of the tree fern in Sri Lanka, the angel of Java, and the mountain god from South Africa. The stanzas reveal that the first root race or wave of humanity was projected by the higher semi-divine beings out of their own essences. They threw off their shadows or their astral, which means shining, etheric bodies to make the start of the human evolution, the form for humanity. So this picture on the left is the etheric body of a human being, and it extends off the body. So to briefly describe the way this took place, HPB similarized it to what occurred with mediums at a seance. As you may know, when Blavatsky wrote The Secret Doctrine, spiritualism was very popular, and people were going to mediums to try to make contact with a relative who had died. Blavatsky said that materialized forms sometimes oozed out of the bodies of certain mediums, and these forms usually just vanished, but they could be made more solid. This is how the high angelic beings oozed out the first spiritual humans. It's a process similar to fission, where one part becomes two, and this beginning wave of humanity was referred to as mindless because they were just etheric bodies of the devas or angels making them. Throughout the Secret Doctrine, as Blavatsky presents what is meant in the stanzas of Dijon, she cites various mythologies from around the world which corroborate her interpretations. This slide shows devas or angelic beings on clouds denoting a high spiritual plane. And this is on a mural in a Buddhist temple in Bangkok, Thailand, Wat Ratchawat. And this depicts the start of the creation of human beings. The second root race develops from the first root race in a manner of procreation called budding or sweat-born, because it exudes out of the original. The sea anemone has offspring in this way. A small portion of the anemone swells out from the surface and grows and eventually separates from the original, and it becomes the size of the parent. This is how the second root race was formed, and it also was completely ethereal and asexual. The process of development continued, and the next level was the third root race of the Lemurians. They were also asexual, considered hermaphrodite, or having the characteristics of both male and female within and in potential. Over the millions of years, the Lemurians developed into the egg-born humanity, and Blavatsky describes them as being only dreamlike, wrapped in a cloak of mental somnolence or a thick fog, and they were operating from basic instinctive consciousness. It is during the development of the third root race that human beings are given their minds. The Secret Doctrine teaches us that divine beings called Munasaputras, or sons of mind, descend upon the human beings and use the flame of the intellectual solar fire to ignite their thinking minds. And this is the beginning of self-consciousness as it is awakened. The celestial beings, the Manasaputras, incarnate into the mindless bodies to give them consciousness. In Greek mythology, this is accomplished by Prometheus, and you can see the picture of the torture of Prometheus. Now, the story goes that Prometheus was originally involved in creating her human beings, And as this progressed, he realized in order for them to preserve their survival, he had to give them intellect and reason, the spark of the sacred fire, but it was only to be found on Mount Olympus. So one night, Prometheus crept up the mountain, the home of his cousin, the god Zeus. And even though he feared Zeus's thunderbolts, which were deadly, he secretly employed the help of Zeus's children and captured the sacred fire, bringing it back to earth hidden in a fennel stalk. He was successful, but Zeus found out about all the fire being used by the human beings. So, as punishment, he sentenced Prometheus to eternal torment by being chained to a rock where each day an eagle, the emblem of Zeus, would eat at Prometheus's liver, which would grow back overnight to be eaten once again the next day. In the story, eventually Prometheus was freed by the hero Heracles. So this shows the sculpture of 1762 of Prometheus with his liver being pecked at. So a note, the liver can grow back if it is reduced in half, which is remarkable. And it keeps us alive by clearing toxins from the blood, among many other functions. So this shows a vase that I tipped on its side, and it shows Prometheus's liver being pecked at. It's kind of high where his chest would be. The liver is lower in the body, tucked under the rib cage. And then the bleeding is occurring, and it looks like it's coming from the thigh, but I think it's dripping off there because it's coming from his liver. Humanity was also given guidance by the Manasaputras, who taught them how to plant corn and wheat, which they needed to survive, ways of clean and moral living, the arts and sciences, including architecture. So they taught the third root race how to build these structures. And we have the Mycenae citadel in Greece. And so we're in the third root race, and this was built we're in the fifth root race, sorry, and that was built in the third root race. People were bigger then. We've consolidated our bodies to be dense in our height and size now. They might have been 30 feet or more tall. And so this is pictures of the Greek citadel, and then we have the Cyclopean architecture, and it shows a gigantic rocks that were brought together to form the structures. And then we have another one that Blavatsky makes reference to, Tiwanaku in Bolivia, huge. So that person is 24 feet high in the sculpture there, maybe about the size of the humans at the time. After eons of evolution, the third race human beings became capable of all emotion, and the mind has developed so there is clear power and choice. Blavatsky describes that there were no mystery schools at the time because the ancient wisdom was common for all to know. So what is the ancient wisdom? Succinctly, it's information about the creation of the universe, how the laws of nature work, the details of the world of the angelic kingdom and of the fairies, among many other things. As we have seen, the third root race of Lemuria at its beginning was semi-divine and pure, and there was no evil at that point. But Blavatsky teaches that with evolution and as mankind became more material, the individuality of each person began to assert itself and selfishness developed. But we are taught that this serves an important purpose. It allows the individual to develop a strong center within, which prompts him to greater progress. It is only after this center becomes established that unselfishness can grow. However, its downside is the potential for an abuse of power. HPB writes that many of Lemuria chose the path of spiritual inclination, but others chose the path of selfishness and greed. And she writes, the mysteries of heaven and earth revealed to the third race by their celestial teachers in the days of their purity became the great focus of light. The rays from which became weakened as they were shed upon the two material soil. With the masses, they degenerated into sorcery. Now, sorcery refers to what is called black magic, where someone selfishly goes after what they want and takes advantage of people in the process. And it can involve manipulating the elementals and other supernatural beings by using the will. And magic can involve ritual or specific actions done with the force of the mind and the will to bring about a change. Now, this is in contrast to white magic or right-hand magic, which is selfless and done for others. So a positive example is the priest's blessing on the left to the congregation when he makes the form of a cross, or on the right, the sprinkling of holy water by the Orthodox Christian priest. On the other side, we humans can unconsciously do black magic with uncontrolled negative thoughts where we might want to hurt someone we're mad at. And this doesn't bring much harm, luckily, because our will isn't very developed at this point. But Theosophy teaches us always to be mindful of what we think and always to be aware of the motive. And Blavatsky says, between the right and left hand magic, there is but a cobweb thread. Because of self-interest, there's a fine line between white magic's concern for others and blending into just having concern for ourselves. An example that Blavatsky and other writers give of the abuse of power in ancient Egypt can be seen in the Egyptian priest and magician. He was a member of the Scarlet Council and used ceremonial magic to invoke and control spirits. He wore sanctified clothes and carried a wand inscribed with hieroglyphics. With the symbols on his wand, and with gestures and sounds like tapping on the floor, and with his determined will, he could manipulate the elementals to do his bidding. So you can see the priest's hands are crossed, but examples of wands are Tutankhamun's crook and flail. Now, these were only used by the pharaoh, and the crook is the shepherd's hook to bring back sheep that have wandered off. And it's symbolic of the pharaoh being a shepherd to his subjects. And then the flail is used for threshing grain from its husks, and that symbolizes fertility, and it was also used for punishment. And on the right is the Christian crozier, a staff used today by a Christian governing official. And it shows the two serpents forming the crook, and then the cross on the top. The Egyptian black magicians, shown on the right of the Scarlet Council, controlled the pharaoh and gave false interpretations of the emblems of the mysteries, so people couldn't understand them or use them for good. The people and the pharaoh became basically slaves to the council. Blavatsky says that contributing to this decay was the age of idolatry, superstition, and fanaticism. So the picture on the left is from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and it has on the very right Pashed praying to the sarcophagus of Osiris, and then two other gods on the very left. And then the text has spells and instructions in it for reanimation of the soul and of how to traverse the afterlife. With this evolution of the root races and the development of selfishness, Blavatsky describes the need for limiting the human being's power. She writes, hence necessity of gradually taking away from man the divine knowledge and power whose evil side was ever threatening one's neighbor, and whose power for good was lavished freely only upon self. Magic had been the natural gift of the Lemurians, but the Atlanteans in the fourth root race, or wave of humanity, used it to exploit and dominate the masses. Until then, there had been no reason to have the mystery schools because the knowledge of magic was the common property of mankind. HPB writes in the collected writings of hers, and there's a section on the origin of the mysteries, which is excellent. She says that selfishness was born out of desires and passions hitherto unknown, and too often knowledge and power were abused until it finally became necessary to limit the numbers of those who knew. Thus rose initiation. So the pictures are examples of initiations in current day, and they be the knighthood on the right, or it may be Freemasonry in the center, or of an initiation in the Hindu ceremony. I will be describing the mystery school initiations a little later in the talk. In The Secret Doctrine, HPB describes that with this abuse of spiritual powers, a high spiritual being called the Lord of the World, or the planetary logos or spirit, called Sanat Kumara, and that's the Hindu representation of the planetary logos. He selected a band of co-workers committed to protect the ancient wisdom and put to good use the unseen powers of the universe. They had demonstrated their allegiance to their mentor, the planetary logos, and the great brotherhood was formed. And you can see the pictures on the right of the masters Kuthumi and Moria, who helped with the beginning of the Theosophical Society. And then other masters are included. This was also written about by Gordon D. Peruker in the esoteric tradition. He writes, the silent watcher of the globe, the Lord of the world, through the spiritual magnetic attraction of like to like, attracted certain unusual individuals of the third race to form a focus of spiritual and intellectual light on earth, the start of the brotherhood of the Mahatmas. Blavatsky writes that those few elect thus became in time the sole guardians of the mysteries revealed, passing the knowledge to those most fit to receive it. And this was 12 million years ago. And HPB says that these divine teachers were the germ of a hierarchy which never died since that period. She says they inspired the grand religions of the past and help with discoveries in science and philosophy. And they will continue to send forth their help as long as mankind requires their care. Some of the world teachers are Jesus and Buddha, Zoroaster from Iran, and with their god Ahura Mazda, and that's where Iran is now. And then Hermes from Egypt and Lao Tzu of China. The first mystery schools were established 4 to 5 million years ago in Atlantis, and they had to be secret and passed on information only to those who passed trials and probations. The mysteries were imparted to the intellect of that race when the average Atlantean had begun to fall too deeply into sin to be trusted with the secrets of nature. And that's from the collected writings. The purpose of the mystery schools is to provide humanity with the esoteric knowledge of spirituality, as well as to give rise to new recruits for the brotherhood. The mystery schools and the mysteries were divided into 2 distinct sections, and they were referred to as the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. And the lesser mysteries provided a simple moral code for all people to live by and prepared a person to be ready for the greater mysteries where deeper information was given. So you can see the 10 commandments on the left of Christianity and Judaism, and then the Hindu principles formalized by Patanjali. And they both had similar guidelines, such as not hurting someone, not stealing, not lying. And the difference between the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries is depicted in the various religions. For example, in Christianity, the Bible says Jesus spoke to the multitude in parable, but when they were alone, he expounded all things to his disciples. So Jesus was an initiate of the mystery school of the Essenes, who are thought to be the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Essenes were a monastic community of Jews in the Judean desert in Palestine. In Judaism, the lesser mysteries were given to the multitudes through the Torah or the Hebrew Bible. The secret wisdom, the Chokmah Nestorah, was given to the few, orally, face to face, and mouth to ear. In the Greek Eleusinian mysteries, the lesser mysteries were taught to candidates who were mistai, closed of eye and mouth, and that's without intuition yet. And the right picture shows the mystery schools on that vase from Greece. The greater mysteries of Greece were taught to candidates who had developed epoptai, and that's clear seeing. And this is direct perception of the divine realities, and it's the highest state of initiation. And you can see the Ninian tablet of mortals encountering the Eleusinian deities there in this picture, and that's in the museum in Athens. In Hinduism and then Buddhism, Buddha Gautama had one doctrine for his lay disciples, the other for his arhat. His principle was to refuse no one admission into the ranks of arhatship, but never to divulge the final mysteries except to those who had proved themselves during long years of probation to be worthy of initiation. So the purpose of the lesser mysteries is to enable us to move deeper into the greater mysteries. And to achieve this, it is useful to look at the levels of consciousness that Blavatsky introduced to us. First of all, at the top, there's Atman, and that's the absolute, or the unity of all, or the God. Some religions speak of God, or Ahura Mazda. Then we have Buddhi, and that's the field of intuition. And these are getting denser and denser as we go down the list. Then next there's Manas, and that's the mental body or the mind. And it's the higher mind with Buddhi Manas, and the lower mind with Kama Manas. And so Kama is the desire body, and that's our emotions. And so the everyday mind has the desire body mixed in with the everyday thinking. Then we have prana, and that's the vitality or energy within and coming off the body. And it's called chi in China or ki in Japan. And you may have heard the term Reiki, which refers to the universal life force. Then we have denser down these levels, the linga sharira, and that's the etheric double coming off the human body. And you can sense it with your hand above your wrist or even between your palms. And there's a springiness or subtle bounciness of the energy, and that's beyond the heat. And then lastly, we have the Stahula Sharira, and that's the physical body. So the mysteries teach us to be in control of the personal everyday self so we can receive the teachings of the greater mysteries. We can use the levels of consciousness to see what the mystery schools taught, and it correlates perfectly. So this slide shows the levels of consciousness with the spiritual higher self, and that's the absolute or God within us and our intuition, and the higher mind, which receives the intuition and utilizes reason and wisdom. Then the personal everyday self, that's the lower mind, the everyday mind, which has the emotions and the physical body in the everyday self. So the mysteries teach us, starting at the lowest level, the physical body, we need to have use self-purification. This means eating right, not too much, vegetarianism, and then no tobacco smoking or drug use or alcohol. And then the mystery schools taught the emotions needed to be controlled and regulated, and all negative emotions were to be curtailed. There was taught the acceptance of life circumstances with learning detachment and desirelessness. This is demonstrated in the Egyptian mythology with Anubis weighing a heart against a feather, or weighing how much a person's heart is filled with personal desire or heart's desires. And this can also include negative desires, which make the heart really heavy on Anubis's scale. And that's from judgment of others or talking poorly about them. Then moving up the levels of consciousness, the mind needs to be developed through controlling one's thoughts and realizing how they affect ourselves and our surroundings. The purpose of life is also taught, and how to consciously participate in its evolution. And then, of course, karma and reincarnation are also explained. Corresponding to the Buddhic level of consciousness, the mystery schools emphasize that the intuition can be developed through self-study, contemplation, and meditation. and this develops our spiritual perception in order to follow the master's guidance. The awareness of unity, or the Atman, develops through meditation and the development of altruism, or helping others, and that's a direct offshoot of realizing the unity of all of life. HPB says, all that is good, noble, and grand in human nature was cultured by the priest philosophers who sought to develop them in their initiates. Their code of ethics based on altruism has become universal. Charles W. Leadbeater, in his book, The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, writes of the mysteries from a past life review where he was looking at the origins of Masonry. He describes the life in Egypt around 4000 before current era. He explains that the Egyptian mysteries were imparted by a world teacher about 40,000 before current era. Now that's 42,000 years ago. And that world teacher taught the doctrine of the hidden light. According to Leadbeater, everyone in Egypt knew about the existence of the mysteries, and thousands participated in the entry level of Isis, and that's the lesser mysteries. It's believed that each person had the hidden light of the deity within them, and this was called upon in their religious ceremonies. So you can see the fresco on the left in the Temple of Isis at Pompeii from the 1st century current era. And that depicts the ceremony worshiping the sarcophagus of Osiris. And then on the right is the picture of the Roman statue of Isis. The information in the greater mystery schools was passed on only to those who had curbed their low nature and were able to access self-born wisdom. The esoteric wisdom was perceived intuitively from master to candidate for adeptship through initiation. It was a huge amount of information, and Blavatsky writes, the whole essence of truth cannot be transmitted from mouth to ear, nor can any pen describe it, unless a man finds the answer in the sanctuary of his own heart, in the innermost depth of his divine intuition. There was too much information to be described, so the intuition needed to absorb it. And you all know self-born wisdom. It is what you feel when inside you know the right thing to do in a situation, or when the wrong thing to do is very clear. This self-born wisdom in us is what we need to do to develop our intuition. Because the mysteries were secret and the mystery schools respected that, not much was written about them, but we do know what other Greeks wrote about them. One of the mystery schools that we know something about is Pythagoras' mystery school in Crotona, Italy. The outer court of the temple, now that's the lesser mysteries. That's where basic lessons were taught, and discipline was emphasized to control the lower nature. Women were admitted and vegetarianism was required. Meditation was expected and 5 years of silence was imposed. And as you can well imagine, many failed to keep their vow of silence and were thus excluded from the school. Disciples had to reject all worldly honors and privileges from a noble birth or family wealth. And if a person displayed pride or arrogance, menial duties were imposed on him. After 5 years of silence, it was unlikely that a person could not control his tongue. The disciples were taught self-examination and self-improvement, and this led easily into meditation practices. Each morning at rising, the disciple was to contemplate the work of the day, seeking for weaknesses in his own nature, which might be corrected in the days ahead. Before retiring at night, a retrospective exercise was required where the disciple reviewed his conduct, trying to become more aware of errors or failings and their consequences. The school emphasized proper attitude of not being attached to personal needs or wants. Students were taught the difference between contemplation and meditation. So contemplation is thinking profoundly about something to engage the wisdom and the intellect, the intuition beyond the intellect. Meditation, however, is detaching from all particulars of the intellect, neither inquiring nor analytical, so one can experience deep union with the unknown divine. This trains and deepens the normal ways of the mind. If contemplation seeks to explore the mind of God, meditation seeks to discover the heart of God. If worked at, meditation can develop in the disciple an underlying state of mind where he could continually live in the eternal at all times. Slowly but surely, HPB says meditation acts like leaven or yeast in the loaf, yeast in the bread, for continued awakening of the intuition to its divine nature, and then living with that awareness. Another organization that has its principles from the mystery schools is the Esoteric School of Theosophy. It's an adjunct to the Theosophical Society and has similar practices to the ancient mystery schools. Its goal is for people to develop virtues in the everyday self to align with the inner spiritual self. And it includes study of the texts of the ancient wisdom and meditation. The practices of the esoteric school incorporate a review process similar to the end of the day review of Pythagoras, which strengthens one's self-awareness of how they're thinking and acting. The purpose of the ES is to prepare oneself to better serve the principles taught by the masters. We know something about the mystery school of yoga of Patanjali, who was the 2nd century before current era sage in India. He taught 5 external limbs or guidelines to live in the world, plus 5 additional internal limbs or practices. And they were included earlier in my slide of the moral code of the lesser mysteries. So Patanjali taught the yamas or abstentions to avoid wrong behavior as ahimsa, nonviolence, satya, telling the truth, asteya, not stealing, brahmacharya, sexual fidelity, and aparigraha, not holding on to things or experiences. And then, of course, having no jealousy. And this comes from the root to grasp or graha, and that's detachment. Then there were the 5 niyamas or observances for right behavior. And these progress into meditation, as you will see. So we have shaucha, cleanliness, santosha, contentment, that's the emotions, and tapas, that self-control of both the emotions and the mind and what we say that's holding ourselves back, inhibiting ourselves. Then swadhyaya, or self-study, and this is the witness, the part of us that can observe ourselves, and that's our awareness. And then this progresses into self-surrender, Ishvara Pranidhana, and then further instructions for meditation from Patanjali are one, asana. Now, you may have heard asana referring to the pillow that people may sit on in a yoga class, but it's the posture for meditation. Now, that's the right attitude or frame of mind for meditation. And then pranayama is breath control, and they might be various exercises to breathe where the nostrils are covered at times, and this helps to balance the body. But pranayama is also the right communication with other living creatures. And then pratyahara is withdrawal of attention from sense objects. And this leads into dharana, concentration or centering the mind on the self. And then deeper meditation is dhyana, or contemplation. And then samadhi is total absorption in the self. And then, as I've said, these steps prepare us for initiation. Annie Besant writes of initiations in her book, Initiation, the Perfecting of Man. She describes that the first initiation can happen when we are asleep. And this is before the deeper initiations take place because we have not yet learned how to work in our astral bodies. The master summons the person to his presence and places him on probation to see how he does. And one of the effects of this initiation is the deep knowledge of the unity of all of life. So just a note, the masters work with humanity in general and don't just watch individuals, but work with groups of people, or they can put mind streams of spiritual thought to all humanity. And of course, they have capabilities of doing several things at once. So quickly or slowly, whether the probation is lived nobly or poorly, another summons eventually comes. If the master has seen that the person has lived the qualifications and needs deeper teachings in order to apply them to his life, he accepts him as a disciple. And the person's consciousness is blended with the master's, and he aligns his thought to him. The more a person develops, Annie Besant says, the more is demanded. If he errs, karma is swift and stern. She says that the aspirant needs to work steadfastly, and after time, he will know that he has been accepted. Until then, she emphasizes that we are to live a noble life in the position that karma has ordained. For greater initiations, we learn from Gordon D. Peruker in studies in occult philosophy. They often take place in a subterranean cave, a forest, a mountain pass, a temple crypt, or a pyramid chamber due to its being away from the communities where people live with their various thought forms and emotions. He says the currents of the astral light are quieter, more peaceful, and cleaner. In initiation, the candidate deliberately places his body and mind in abeyance, or as Peruker says, he paralyzes them so that he can work in his astral body. And the candidate's consciousness leaves his body in the sarcophagus, and that's when in Egypt times, And then his body is watched over in the initiation chamber. The initiate is able to reach the highest plane of the mental plane, and this affects him deeply. When he returns to his body, he's a changed person. And Leadbeater describes that after initiation, when the person re-enters his entranced body, his head shines with a halo of spiritual light. And current day churches represent holy men that way. And that's seen by a clairvoyant. During a higher initiation, there are cruel trials that the initiate has to overcome on the astral plane. He has to learn to not be swayed by delights or monsters. In The Voice of the Silence, the beautiful poem that Blavatsky gave us, it teaches about the astral hall of learning. In it, thy soul will find blossoms of life, but under every flower, a serpent is coiled. This means that there are dangers on the astral plane, and that the initiate needs to be strong in his will so he can overpower evil influences there. The first tests are to deal with and show that he can control all the elements of earth, air, fire, and water. He then has to demonstrate his knowledge of the powers of nature, and his intuition is what will show him the way. He also has to penetrate in full consciousness worlds more material than ours. In Fundamentals of Esoteric Philosophy, Gordon D. Peruker gives us information about why initiations take place. He says, it is one of the fundamental teachings of occultism that nothing can be truly known which is not experienced or lived through. After preparatory purifications comes the mystic death. The body and lower principles, so to say, are paralyzed, and the soul is temporarily freed. The inner man is guided and helped while he passes to other planes by becoming them, which is the only way that knowledge can root itself in the soul, through experience. Initiations may last either 1 day and night, 3 days and nights, or up to 2 weeks. Higher initiations take place when certain astronomical conjunctions occur, such as with a new moon, where the moon is directly between the earth and the sun. So you can see the earth there, and the moon would be between it and the sun, and it looks like this from our earth, and that's actually the shadow of the moon. Greater initiations take place, excuse me, when there's a conjunction of Venus and Mercury and the sun. So you can see the lineup of the planets there. And then so we have the Earth, and then Venus and Mercury and the sun. And the other planets are to show kind of some size differentiation. The fifth initiation is when adeptship occurs, and it takes place at the winter solstice and lasts 2 weeks. So you can see again the conjunction of the planets and the size difference. But the fifth initiations involve the planets closest to the sun, because that's where the initiate is headed, toward the sun and to the solar logos, or the Sanat Kumara. After the fifth initiation, the initiate returns 2 weeks later on Epiphany in Christianity, or around January 6th, or 12 days after Christmas. Epiphany comes from the Greek mystery schools and is derived from the Greek epi, meaning upon, and pheno, to shine forth. That means the shining forth of the divine light of the initiate. So the picture shows the three magi following the bright star in the sky in the story of Jesus's birth. And the bright star is the conjunction of all the planets. The writers say that the planetary conjunctions are like doors opening into the inner worlds. There is a magnetic pull that enables the initiate to leave the earthly globe and ascend along magnetic lines through Venus and Mercury to the threshold of the sun and then return. The master becomes for a passing moment the wondrous watcher himself, and that's the solar logos. HPB gives us examples of those who have experienced this, and they are Jesus on the left, Krishna, and Apollonius of Tyana. Finally, the greatest known initiation is the birth of a Buddha, and that happens at the winter solstice with the conjunctions of the moon, Mercury, Venus, and the sun. And this initiation happens at extremely rare intervals, twice within the length of a root race, which means 2 times in 8 to 9 million years. So we're lucky to have had Buddha's initiation so close to our time, so we know about his teachings. When the astronomical conjunctions do not occur, initiations go on just the same, but less developed candidates are initiated at the 3 other sacred seasons of the year, the 2 equinoxes of the spring and the fall, and the summer solstice. The mysteries were known around the world, such as by the Druids in Ireland and Scotland, and by the priests of Mithraism. So you can see the picture of Mithra on the right, the sun god, worshipped in pre-Zoroastrian Iran in the Roman Empire. That's in the 2nd and 3rd centuries current era. So this just names a few. There were many. HPB describes that individuals initiating into the mysteries include Tsongkhapa, the 14th century current era Tibetan Buddhist monk, Shankaracharya, the 6th century current era Indian sage, and Plato, as well as Christian Rosenkreutz, who founded the Order of the Rosy Cross, the Rosicrucians. And this was based on the mystery schools. According to HPB, Christian Rosenkreutz was the incarnation of Comte de Saint Germain, and he learned the Egyptian mysteries in Egypt. The Rosicrucians have passed through many cultures and still are around today. So what happened to the mystery schools? Some died out or had to go underground, as Freemasonry did. The Eleusinian mysteries lasted more than 1,000 years, initiating countless noblemen and commoners, women and men, free persons and slaves. As Christianity flourished, though, the Christian government closed down the mysteries of Eleusis, regarding them as subversive. The Emperor Theodosius II in 380 current era banished paganism from the Roman Empire because Christianity was the main religion, and the mysteries in the West ended. In 529 current era, Justinian closed the last philosophical school in Athens, the academy founded by Plato, where the sacred ritual of the union of the soul with the higher self had turned into an orgy. The mystery tradition had to go underground and was preserved in Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism, as well as Kabbalah, alchemy, and Freemasonry. Even though interest in the mystery school has decreased, we are encouraged by Master Kuthumi in the Mahatma letters, who said, "Fear not, our knowledge will not pass away from the sight of man. The keepers of the sacred light did not safely cross so many ages, but to find themselves wrecked on the rocks of modern skepticism. We will always find volunteers to replace the tired sentries, or the masters. So we are not to get discouraged. HPB reassures us that the process can be difficult, but there is still a road to follow. She says, there is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onward, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless humanity and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come." So in closing, the Golden Stairs is taken from a letter from a master to Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and is included in her collected writings. It's a guide to discipleship and summarizes the lesser mysteries and the virtues to develop. It can be used as a mantra, or it can be said at the start of meditation. And I wanted to list them clearly to you so they could act as inspiration to you on your spiritual path. Behold the truth before you. A clean life, like Shaucha from Patanjali, an open mind, and we need to reduce preconceived notions. A pure heart from realizing the unity of all. An eager intellect, and that's a wanting to learn. An unveiled spiritual perception, and that's from developing our intuition. A brotherliness for one's co-disciple, and that's really accepting all and having brotherliness toward everyone. A readiness to give and receive advice and instruction, so helping to teach others. A loyal sense of duty to the teacher. Now, this can be to the higher self or to a master, or even to the teachings of the ancient wisdom. A willing obedience to the behests of truth once we have placed our confidence in and believe that teacher to be in possession of it. So this involves self-born wisdom, which I mentioned earlier, or our intuition. A courageous endurance of personal injustice. Now that's accepting our karma, because it can be unjust at times, for us to learn. A brave declaration of principles. That's holding true to the moral codes of the lesser mysteries. Those are the principles to keep in mind. A valiant defense of those who are unjustly attacked, and that's to help others. And then a constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection, which the secret science depicts. We will progress even if it's slow. These are the golden stairs up the steps of which the learner may climb to the temple of divine wisdom. Hopefully, this information has inspired you to continue to live as the mystery schools teach. So one day you will receive the higher initiations of the greater mysteries. Thank you.